My name is Daniel Mercer, and for the past 12 years, I have worked as a professional search and rescue tracker in the Pacific Northwest. My job has taken me through every sort of terrain imaginable. Slick mountainsides where a single misstep meant tumbling into a ravine. Valleys where fog sat so heavy that you could not see your own boots, and forests so thick and shadow-laden that daylight seemed to dissolve inside them. I am accustomed to exhaustion, to silence, to the raw solitude of the wild. I am accustomed, too, to the way the wilderness can swallow people whole. But even after a career of finding lost hunters, stranded climbers, and disoriented hikers, there is one case that stands apart. One call that pulled me into a section of woods I cannot name without my voice tightening, because I left part of myself there. I was first contacted on an evening in late September. The air had turned brittle, the kind that carries the smell of pine needles breaking underfoot. A ranger from a small district station phoned me, his voice sounding tight and clipped. He explained that a 31-year-old man named Joshua Leland had gone missing on a solo hike. Joshua's car had been found parked at the trailhead of a lesser-known path leading into a vast forest system that bordered 3 counties. He was supposed to have checked in with his family the previous night. When no word came, and when daylight bled away with still no sign, they had alerted the rangers. Ordinarily, such calls are routine. People underestimate the terrain, lose their sense of direction, or overextend themselves and decide to hunker down. 9 times out of 10, we find them with sore feet, embarrassed smiles, and stories about how they almost got back before dark. But the ranger's tone gave me pause. He kept saying something about the woods out there, how they had a way of confusing you. I asked him to clarify, but he only muttered that I would understand once I got there. By dawn the next morning, I was driving north along roads that wound deeper into an unfamiliar stretch of wilderness. Mist curled low in the valleys, and the trees rose like black pillars through it. There was a loneliness to the land, an expanse that seemed untouched not just by people, but by time itself. When I reached the ranger station, a squat building of weather-stained wood, I met with 2 rangers, a grizzled older man named Fulton and a younger woman named Hale. Both looked tired, though search operations had only just begun. Fulton wasted no time briefing me. Joshua's car was still at the trailhead locked. The trail he had chosen was technically open but rarely used, as it didn't lead to any notable summit or lake. According to his family, Joshua had been an experienced hiker, not prone to recklessness. His backpack, water supply, and phone were presumed to be with him. What concerned them was the complete lack of sign. Volunteers had walked the first miles of trail, and even pushed a little into the brush, but there were no tracks, no discarded gear, nothing. It's like he just walked in and disappeared, Fulton said, rubbing the stubble along his jaw. I should mention that tracking is not about heroics. It is about details. The angle of a boot print, the way moss is disturbed, a bent twig that suggests passage. A trained eye can read the forest like a book, provided the forest wants to be read. That morning, as we made our way toward the trailhead, I felt a weight settle in my chest. The trees seemed closer together than they should have been, leaning in with limbs that interlocked overhead. The trail itself looked narrower than I expected, as though the forest had been trying to reclaim it. At the parking area, Joshua's car sat alone, a silver sedan flecked with pine needles. Inside were fast food wrappers, a folded map of the region, and a receipt timestamped 2 days earlier from a gas station 20 miles south. Everything appeared in order. I examined the ground around the car. The dirt was damp from the night's dew, but faint impressions led from the driver's side toward the trail. The prints matched a medium-sized hiking boot, men's, consistent with Joshua. That was the last certain thing we had. I followed those prints into the forest. For the first half-mile, they were steady, confidently placed. Then the trail curved around a slope, and I noticed something odd. The impressions became lighter, as though he had started walking on his toes, or as if his weight were somehow lifted. I crouched, studying the soil, the way needles had shifted. It wasn't wind. It wasn't animal. The spacing of the steps grew irregular, then faded entirely. I moved in widening circles, searching for continuation, but the tracks did not resume. It was as if the man had stepped off the earth itself. I radioed back to Fulton and Hale, describing what I had found. Hale's response was quick, but her voice cracked faintly. "That's how it goes out here," she said. "They just stop. Every time." I asked her what she meant by every time, but she didn't answer. Fulton cut in to say we'd regroup at the half-mile marker. When I reached them, I noticed how both rangers kept glancing at the trees. Not the way you glance when you're alert for wildlife, but as if they expected the trees themselves to shift. The air had grown unnaturally still. No birdsong, no rustle. The silence pressed against my eardrums until I became aware of my own breathing. We pushed farther, calming both sides of the trail. I marked potential disturbances, broken ferns, a scuffed patch of soil, but nothing formed a coherent line. The deeper we went, the more I felt the forest itself resisting. Imagine trying to read a text where letters rearrange themselves when you look too long. That is what tracking felt like here. By midday, clouds had thickened, and a cool drizzle began seeping through the canopy. We paused to eat a quick meal of protein bars and jerky. I studied the rangers. Hale ate little, her eyes scanning the trees as if they whispered. Fulton kept his radio on low volume, even though reception was minimal. I asked again what they meant about the tracks stopping every time. After a long silence, Fulton exhaled heavily. "Over the years, we've had more than a dozen cases out here," he said. "Campers, hunters, hikers. Folks who should have been easy to find. But once they cross a certain point, it's like they're swallowed. Dogs won't pick up scent. Tracks cut off clean. Sometimes we find gear, sometimes nothing. Never the person." I waited, thinking he might be exaggerating, but Hale finally spoke, her voice quiet. "Last spring, a whole family vanished. Tent, cooler, firewood all still there. No tracks leading away. It was like they just stood up and walked into the air." Their words settled over me heavier than the rain. I told myself that stories grow legs in places like this, that memory twists when fear takes root. But even so, the unease in my gut would not leave. I decided not to challenge them further. Instead, I focused on the terrain. The forest was a mix of Douglas fir and cedar, with undergrowth so thick it formed a living wall. Visibility shrank to 20 feet. The ground was spongy with moss, masking any faint sign of passage. My usual methods, pacing distances, triangulating from disturbances, felt clumsy here. The forest offered no cooperation. At one point, Hale called me over to a rotted log. On its damp surface lay a single object, a torn piece of fabric. It was dark green, frayed at one end, and damp with rain. Fulton checked Joshua's file and confirmed he had been wearing a green jacket. Relief flickered in me. Finally, tangible sign. But when I lifted the fabric, I saw that the underside was blackened, as if scorched. There had been no fire. I tucked the fabric into an evidence bag and marked the GPS coordinates. The rangers didn't speak as we resumed. I noticed Hale's hands trembling slightly as she held her compass. The day wore on, hours dissolving into gray monotony. We covered nearly 5 miles of ground, fanning out in methodical sweeps. Yet the forest resisted every effort. The deeper we pressed, the more distorted it seemed. Trees that should have been evenly spaced leaned unnaturally. Fallen logs formed patterns too deliberate to be random. Once, I thought I heard water, but when I turned, the sound stopped. Dusk crept fast. We radioed back to base, reporting limited findings. The command post advised us to camp overnight at the 3-mile clearing. I dislike overnights in active search zones. It risks contaminating tracks, but the terrain left us no choice. We set up tents as darkness fell. Our small fire hissed under the drizzle, giving off more smoke than heat. We ate in silence. Every crack of wood seemed louder than it should, echoing far beyond the treacle. That night, sleep came in fits. Around midnight, I woke to the faint sound of footsteps outside my tent. Slow, deliberate, circling. My hand closed around the knife by my pack. I held still, breath locked in my throat. The steps stopped, replaced by something else, a soft dragging sound, like cloth being pulled through leaves. I forced myself to unzip the tent quietly, peering out. The fire had died to embers. Moonlight slipped in through gaps in the canopy. Nothing moved, but I smelled something, wet earth and a metallic tang, like rust. I stepped out, scanning. The other tents were zipped tight. I whispered Hale's name, but she did not stir. The dragging sound came again, farther this time, pulling me toward the tree line. Against my better judgment, I followed, each step muffled by moss. 10 yards from camp, I stopped. The forest stood like a wall, shadows stacked upon shadows. And there, just at the edge of sight, hung something I still struggle to explain, a faint shimmer in the air, as if heat rose from the ground though the night was cold. It bent the trees behind it, warping them like reflections in water. The dragging sound slipped into it and vanished. I blinked, and the shimmer was gone. The woods were silent once more. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to retreat. Finally I did, backing toward camp, refusing to turn my back on the trees. When dawn came, I told myself it had been exhaustion, a trick of the eyes. But the unease remained, a knot in my chest. And as we packed to continue deeper, I could not shake the feeling that the forest itself was aware of us, watching, waiting. Morning came gray and damp. The kind of light that filters through mist and makes it impossible to know what time it is without a watch. My body ached from the restless night, and though I told myself I had imagined what I'd seen, the knot of dread in my stomach pulsed stronger with every breath. Hale looked hollow-eyed when she emerged from her tent, and Fulton avoided my gaze altogether, fussing with the stove and boiling water for instant coffee. None of us spoke much as we packed up camp. Silence had settled into our group like another presence, heavy and undeniable. We set out shortly after sunrise, heading deeper into the forest. The trail had long since faded into scattered hints of human passage and indentation in the moss. A faint blaze on a tree so weather-worn it could have been natural scaring. I relied on instinct and years of training, triangulating from small disturbances, listening for the language of the woods. But here, the forest's language spoke in riddles. At mid-morning, Hale halted abruptly, raising her hand. We froze. Ahead, between two cedars, lay something pale against the dark ground. I approached slowly, senses prickling. It was a strip of paper, damp and clinging to the soil. I eased it free and found it was a page torn from a small notebook. The ink had bled, but I could make out a few words scrawled hastily. I can hear them at night. Voices not mine. The three of us stared at the page. It was the first sign that Joshua might still have been alive, that he had experienced something before vanishing. Hale's face tightened as she read the words aloud. Fulton cursed under his breath, though whether at fear or frustration I could not tell. We bagged the page and pushed forward, every nerve stretched taut. I found myself listening for voices, straining against the silence. Hours passed. The drizzle had soaked everything, and our boots squelched against the earth. Around noon, I noticed something peculiar. The trees ahead seemed arranged in a perfect circle, an unnatural symmetry. At the center stood a low mound of stones, weathered and moss-covered, resembling a cairn. We approached warily. The cairn stood waist-high, built with deliberate precision. On its top rested a hiking boot. It was caked in mud but intact. The laces knotted. Hale lifted it carefully. Inside was a wad of paper, dry despite the rain. She eased it out, revealing another page torn from the same notebook as before. The writing was more frantic this time, letters. Jagged the path bends back on itself. I walked all day and came to my own tracks. They don't lead out, they lead deeper. My skin prickled. I checked the ground around the cairn. There were faint disturbances in the moss, but they seemed older than a day. Something about the site felt staged, as though we were meant to find it. We decided to mark the location with GPS and radio it in. The command post acknowledged, advising us to proceed with caution. That word, caution, felt laughably inadequate. The terrain grew rougher as we climbed a ridge. The forest thickened, light dwindling. At one point, Fulton muttered that we should turn back, regroup, wait for additional teams. But Hale pushed on, perhaps driven by fear of returning empty-handed. I followed, though unease coiled tighter in my chest. By late afternoon, the rain eased, leaving the forest slick and gleaming. That was when we found the camp. It was in a shallow hollow, shielded on three sides by steep banks. A tent lay collapsed, its poles bent as if something had pressed down on it with immense force. Nearby was a small fire ring, blackened with ash. A cooking pot sat overturned, its contents rotted into unrecognizable sludge. I crouched, examining the ground. The camp appeared to belong to one person. The tent was modern, lightweight, the kind Joshua might have carried. Inside, I found a sleeping bag, still zipped. No signs of struggle, no blood. But the air felt raw, heavier than it should have. We searched every inch. Hale discovered a phone wedged between rocks near the fire ring. Its screen was cracked, battery dead. We bagged it for later. Fulton found another notebook page pinned under a stone inside the tent. The message was short, scrawled with trembling hand. They are not people. Don't follow the voices. We gathered outside the ruined tent, each of us staring at the note. Hale's lips moved soundlessly, reading it again and again. Fulton looked at me, his eyes asking a question neither of us wanted to voice. Had Joshua lost his mind, or had he seen something real? We decided to set up a temporary base near the camp, radioing our find to command. The rangers at the post said they would send additional searchers in the morning. Until then, we were on our own. Night fell heavy and fast. The hollow amplified every sound, and the darkness seemed thicker than the night before. We lit a small fire and sat close, the flames our only comfort. I kept replaying the notebook messages in my head. Voices not mine. Paths folding back. Warnings not to follow. Around midnight I heard them. At first, it was subtle. A murmur just beyond the range of comprehension, like wind threading through distant branches. Then it grew clearer, distinct syllables, though too soft to fully understand. The voices circled the hollow, sometimes close, sometimes far. Male and female tones overlapping, as though a crowd whispered just beyond the trees. Hale gripped her radio like a weapon. Fulton muttered prayers under his breath. I forced myself to focus. Sound carries strangely in forests, bouncing off trunks, creating illusions of distance. But this felt different. The voices never overlapped with the crackle of the fire, as though they occupied a separate layer of reality. Then one of them spoke my name. Clear, deliberate from the darkness beyond the firelight. Daniel. My blood ran cold. Hale's head snapped toward me, eyes wide. She had heard it too. Fulton swore, reaching for his flashlight. He swung the beam across the trees, but nothing reflected back. The voices ceased instantly, leaving only the thrum of silence. We did not sleep after that. We sat by the fire until dawn, every flicker of shadow making us flinch. When light finally crept into the hollow, we looked at each other and knew none of us could explain what had happened. The next day, reinforcements arrived, 3 additional rangers and 2 volunteers. We briefed them, carefully omitting the part about voices. Instead, we emphasized the notebook pages and the ruined camp. Still, I caught Hale staring at me when no one else was looking, as though silently confirming we had both heard the same impossible thing. The new team spread out to search wider. I paired with Hale, while Fulton led the others along the ridge. Hours passed with no sign. Then, mid-afternoon, Hale and I stumbled upon something that froze us in place. It was another cairn, larger this time, built taller than a person. And embedded within the stones were objects, scraps of clothing, pieces of gear, and at the very top, a torn photograph pinned by a twig. The photo showed Joshua, smiling at the trailhead, the date stamp only 3 days old. Hale whispered that we should destroy the cairn, scatter the stones, but instinct told me that would be a mistake, though I couldn't explain why. Instead, we photographed it, marked the coordinates, and retreated. That night, the voices returned. Louder this time, more insistent, echoing through the trees as though dozens surrounded us. And again, one called my name. I gripped my knife, heart hammering, while Hale whispered through clenched teeth, "Don't answer it. Whatever you do, don't answer."
I didn't.
But I came close, because beneath the terror, something about the voice carried a terrible familiarity, as if it wasn't trying to lure me but plead with me, as if it knew me. And deep down, I feared what that meant. The third morning began with a fog so thick it clung to our skin like damp cloth. Sound was muffled, the fire's smoke barely rising before it dissolved into the white haze. When I woke, I realized I had dreamed of the voices all night, their whispers threaded into every shallow stretch of sleep. Hale looked worse, her eyes red, her skin pale. Fulton didn't emerge from his tent until we'd nearly packed to move, and when he did, his hands trembled as though he'd aged 10 years overnight. The reinforcements hadn't fared much better. They'd camped a short distance from us, yet when we gathered, one of the volunteers, a young man named Cooper, refused to look at the trees. He muttered that he'd heard laughter echoing through the woods, children's laughter, though no one else admitted to it. His friend, a sturdier man named Riley, tried to calm him, but I could see unease beneath his forced grin. We split into 2 teams that morning, against my better judgment. Fulton led Riley and another ranger named Morrison westward, while Hale and I took Cooper east. The plan was to reconvene by dusk, using GPS markers to keep aligned. The forest grew stranger as Hale and I pushed forward. The terrain didn't match my maps. Streams ran where no streams should. Ridges curved in impossible directions. My compass needle jittered, twitching several degrees each time I checked it. I trusted the GPS, but even that began to falter, its signal flickering in and out. Cooper lagged behind, flinching at every sound. His nerves were fraying, but I didn't blame him. The forest had shifted into something hostile, its silence oppressive. Even the drizzle had ceased, leaving the air dead still. Around midday, we stumbled upon another cairn. This one had collapsed partially, stones tumbled as if disturbed. At its base lay another page from Joshua's notebook, weighted by a rock. The writing was smeared but legible. "If you hear them use your name, it's already too late. They know you." Hale stiffened as she read it aloud, her voice breaking on the last words. Cooper cursed under his breath, backing away from the cairn. I stared at the page, my chest tightening. Joshua had written it, and he had experienced exactly what I had. That meant he'd heard the voices too. That meant he hadn't imagined them. We debated returning to camp, but I pushed us onward. I told myself it was for Joshua, that each clue meant he had passed this way, that he might still be alive. But deep down, I knew something else was pulling me forward. The voices had spoken my name, and despite the fear, part of me wanted to know why. We trekked another mile before something happened that froze my blood. The trail ahead bent sharply, curving around a ridge. When we followed it, I stopped dead in my tracks. There in the mud were footprints, ours. My boot print, Hale's lighter tread, Cooper's scuffed heel. The exact sequence of steps we had taken earlier, leading forward as though we had looped in on ourselves. Hale's face drained of color. "We've been walking in circles," she whispered. But it wasn't just circles. I crouched, studying the prints. They were fresh, too fresh. The edges crisp, unblurred by rain or time. These weren't just our past tracks. We were walking behind ourselves. Cooper snapped. He shouted into the trees, demanding to know what game was being played, his voice cracking. The forest swallowed his words. Then, faintly, from somewhere deeper, came an echo of his own shout, distorted and delayed. We dragged him back, trying to calm him, but I knew the damage was done. The woods weren't just confusing us. They were folding us into themselves. We pushed forward cautiously, marking trees with bright tape as we went. Yet an hour later, we found our own tape, tied freshly as though mocking us. Cooper refused to move, insisting we would die if we kept going. Hale argued with him until he collapsed to the ground, sobbing. I hated myself for thinking it, but he was slowing us down. That was when we heard the whistle. High, clear, carrying through the trees. Not a bird. Not an animal. It was deliberate. 3 short notes. Search signal, Hale muttered, her eyes lighting briefly. Maybe Fulton's team. We called back, using our whistles. A pause. Then the same 3 notes answered. Relief flickered. We pushed toward the sound, dragging Cooper to his feet. But the whistling led us deeper, twisting around ridges, pulling us along until I realized with cold certainty it wasn't leading us to anyone. It was leading us away. Hale realized it at the same moment. We stopped, breathless, the last note still echoing. Then the forest fell silent again. From the trees ahead came a voice, Riley's voice. Clear, distinct, calling.
This way!
We found him. Cooper lurched forward, desperate to follow. I grabbed his arm, yanking him back. That's not him, I hissed. Hale's eyes widened, understanding instantly. We hadn't told Riley about the voices. He couldn't have known. But here was his voice, calling to us, perfectly familiar. The air grew colder. A shadow passed between the trees, quick and fluid. For a moment I saw the outline of a figure, tall and indistinct, before it dissolved into the fog. We retreated, dragging Cooper despite his protests. My instincts screamed to keep moving until the voices faded. When they finally did, we collapsed against a fallen log, shaking. It was late afternoon by then, the light fading faster than it should. We tried to radio Fulton's team, but only static answered. I switched through channels, straining, until finally a broken voice crackled through. It was Fulton, but fragmented as if underwater. Stay put, not safe, don't. Then nothing. Darkness closed quickly. We had no choice but to set camp, though every nerve screamed against it. We found a shallow overhang of rock and huddled beneath it, building the smallest fire we dared. Cooper wouldn't stop muttering, rocking back and forth. Hale sat rigid, her knife clutched in her lap. The voices returned soon after nightfall. This time they didn't circle. They pressed closer, weaving between the trees just beyond our firelight. Sometimes they whispered, sometimes they laughed. Once, I heard my own voice echo back at me, repeating words I hadn't spoken aloud. I wanted to believe exhaustion was breaking me, but then something stepped into view. At the edge of the firelight, barely touched by flame glow, stood a figure. Human in shape, but wrong. Its limbs too long, its posture bent. The shadows clung to it, hiding its face. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It only stood there watching. Hale saw it too. I knew because she gripped my arm so tightly her nails cut my skin. Cooper whimpered, burying his face. The figure remained for what felt like hours, then slowly receded into the dark, dissolving like smoke. The voices followed, fading with it. We didn't sleep. We couldn't. And as dawn broke gray and thin, I realized something terrible. The forest wasn't just watching us. It was learning us. Each hour, it mimicked us more. Each step, it drew us deeper. And still, somewhere out there, Joshua might be alive, or something wearing him might be waiting. The morning after the figure appeared, I felt like my body had been hollowed out. Sleep never came. Just a tense stillness broken by occasional mutters from Cooper and the long silence of Hale sitting beside me. The fire had burned down to black ash. When the first gray streaks of daylight filtered through the mist, we packed up quickly, desperate to move, even if moving meant deeper into whatever trap this forest had laid for us. Cooper resisted, shaking his head, insisting we stay put. His face was blotchy from crying, his eyes bloodshot. He clutched his pack like a lifeline. "They want us to move," he said. "Every time we move, it gets worse." "I'm not going." Hale crouched in front of him, her voice taut but gentle. "If we stay, they'll come back. You saw it last night. Do you want to sit here until it's standing over us?" He didn't answer, only stared at the trees with a vacant expression. Finally, I grabbed him by the arm and hauled him upright. I didn't want to be cruel, but I knew what would happen if we stayed. Cooper staggered after us reluctantly, muttering under his breath. We tried the radios again. Static. Just when I was ready to shut mine off, Fulton's voice cut through faintly. "North Ridge lost Morrison, regroup." Then silence. The three of us exchanged looks. Lost Morrison. That meant one of their team was missing. My stomach twisted. We marked our location and tried to push toward the North Ridge, hoping to close the distance. The forest, of course, had other plans. The trees grew denser, branches interlocking overhead so tightly the daylight dimmed to a permanent twilight. Moss coated every surface, wet and slick. The ground sloped unevenly, leading us in circles. At one point, I was certain I recognized a hollow log we'd passed the day before, only to find our bright tape fluttering from its branch. "Not possible," Hale whispered, staring at the marker. But there it was, tied in the same knot she always used. Cooper snapped again. He tore the tape from the branch, flinging it into the woods. "It's not the same tree," he said, his voice frantic. "It just looks the same. They're copying things. Don't you get it?" Neither of us answered, because part of me feared he was right. By mid-afternoon, we reached a clearing unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was circular, perfectly round, with no undergrowth at its center. The grass was dead, blackened as though scorched. At the middle stood another cairn taller than me. This one was different, built not just of stones but of bones. Deer antlers, hollow skulls, bleached vertebrae, balanced carefully, impossibly. At the base of the cairn lay Morrison's hat. Hale approached slowly, her hand shaking as she lifted it. There was no blood on it, no sign of struggle. Just the hat, set neatly at the base like an offering. That was when we heard the voice again. Morrison's voice. From the trees behind us. "Help me." We spun, flashlights cutting across the trunks. Nothing moved. Then, from the opposite side, "Please, this way." The voice circled us. Desperate, calling. Hale clutched the hat to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. Cooper began to scream that we had to go, that we couldn't stay here. I felt frozen, every instinct torn between following and fleeing. The voice sounded so real, so broken. Then the figure stepped out from the trees. It looked like Morrison at first, his build, his jacket, his gait. But as it drew closer, details slipped. His arms were too long, His head tilted at an unnatural angle. His face, God. His face looked like it had been drawn from memory, features smeared, proportions slightly wrong. He opened his mouth, and Morrison's voice spilled out, begging us to help. Hale screamed. I yanked my knife free, my breath ragged. The thing froze, tilting its head farther, its smile stretching too wide. Then it backed away, dissolving into the mist like it had never been there. We ran. None of us spoke, none of us slowed. We ran until our lungs burned, until the forest finally broke into a slope leading down to a shallow ravine. There we collapsed, gasping. Cooper was hysterical. He kept saying over and over, "It knows us now. It knows what we look like. It's going to wear us." His words weren't nonsense. They echoed the dread already eating at me. We set camp reluctantly as darkness pressed in. The ravine felt no safer, but we couldn't move blind. Hale sat close to the fire, clutching Morrison's hat like a talisman. Cooper wouldn't come near the flames. Muttering that light only made us easier to find. He curled into his sleeping bag on the fringe of camp, rocking. That night, I dreamed of Joshua. He stood at the edge of the firelight, his face clear, his voice his own. He begged me to follow him, to leave Hale and Cooper behind. "You're the one who can find the way," he said. "You're the one they want." His eyes were hollow when he said it. I woke with a start to find the fire nearly out. Hale sat awake, knife in hand. She said she'd heard footsteps circling again, but when she looked, there was nothing. Cooper was gone. We scrambled to our feet, searching. His pack still lay where he'd been, but his sleeping bag was empty. No sound, no sign of struggle. Just gone. Hale wanted to go after him, but I stopped her. I told her we couldn't. If we chased every voice, every shadow, we'd be swallowed too. She looked at me like she hated me for saying it, but she didn't argue. We barely slept again. At dawn, we found Cooper's voice calling from the trees, pleading, promising he was alive. It followed us for miles, until I couldn't tell if it was behind us or in my head. Hale cried quietly as we walked. I kept my jaw clenched until my teeth ached. By late morning, we finally found Fulton, or what was left of him. He sat slumped against a tree, eyes wide open, mouth slack. At first I thought he was dead, but then his chest rose faintly. His skin was pale waxy, his lips cracked. Hale rushed to him, shaking his shoulder. He turned his head slowly toward us and spoke in Cooper's voice. We froze. The sound was perfect, down to the trembling cadence. Fulton's lips moved, but it wasn't him speaking. "Please," he said. "It's me. Help me." Hale screamed, stumbling back. I grabbed her arm, pulling her away. Fulton, or the thing wearing him, kept repeating Cooper's pleas, his mouth moving mechanically, his eyes empty. We ran until we couldn't breathe. Behind us, the voices multiplied, echoing through the forest. Ours, theirs, Joshua's, Morrison's, Cooper's, all blending together in a chorus that chased us deeper. When we finally collapsed, we were alone. Or at least we hoped we were. Hale clutched my arm, whispering that it was hopeless, that the forest wasn't going to let us leave. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the truth lodged in my throat, because I was starting to believe she was right. We didn't stop moving the rest of that day. Every time we slowed, the voices caught up, sometimes faint, sometimes so close I swore the words were being whispered right against the shell of my ear. The forest had grown unfamiliar in a way that was beyond disorientation. The trees weren't just closing in, they were arranging themselves, reshaping the world around us. I had the nauseating sense that if I turned too quickly, I'd see them shift, trunks sliding like pieces in a puzzle. Hale stumbled often, her strength flagging. She still carried Morrison's hat clutched in one hand, fingers white around the brim. Neither of us mentioned Fulton. Neither of us dared to. It was easier to pretend he had died, that the thing we saw wasn't him anymore. By late afternoon, we found ourselves on a ridge overlooking a stretch of forest unlike any I'd seen before. The canopy broke open to reveal a valley below, but instead of green, the trees there were blackened and skeletal, like fire had gutted them centuries ago. Yet no ash, no smell of burning, just husks stretching into the fog. Hale muttered that we should go around, but the ridge curved both ways, endless. If there was a way out of this forest, it had to be through the valley. We descended as daylight faded. The dead trees creaked in the windless air, their branches rattling like bones. The ground was soft, too soft, and my boots sank into it like damp sponge. I glanced down once and saw the outline of something pale beneath the soil, shaped like a human arm. I didn't look again. At the center of the valley stood another cairn, the tallest yet. It rose nearly 12 feet, built of stone and bone and broken wood. Around its base were scattered objects, backpacks, boots, tattered clothing. Some modern, some decades old. I recognized a few items from our search lists: Joshua's green jacket, Morrison's compass, Cooper's water bottle. Hale gagged when she saw them. I forced myself closer, every muscle rigid. At the very base of the cairn was another notebook page, pressed flat by a heavy stone. The words were barely legible, scrawled in frantic strokes. It wears us. It learns us. If you hear your own voice, run. I shoved the page into a bag before Hale could see all of it. Her mind was already splintering under the weight of what we'd witnessed. The voices returned as the last light bled away. They rose from every direction, overlapping until the air quivered with sound. Morrison begging, Fulton praying, Cooper screaming, Joshua pleading, and then, beneath them all, my own voice. I froze. It wasn't an echo, it was me speaking words I had never spoken aloud. Come deeper. You'll find the truth. Leave her. Hale's hand crushed my arm. It's lying, she hissed. Her face was pale, eyes huge. But I couldn't breathe. Hearing myself like that, so clear, was like feeling a hook sink into my chest. The voices pressed closer, circling the cairn. Shadows flitted between the dead trees, tall and thin. Some moved on all fours, some bent backwards, some swayed as though their bones were liquid. But always just far enough that firelight couldn't touch their faces. We retreated to the edge of the valley and built a small fire with the driest wood we could find. The flames barely caught, sputtering weakly. Hale sat trembling, her knife clutched in both hands. I kept scanning the perimeter, though I knew sight alone wouldn't save us. Around midnight, the fire died. The shadows closed in, and something stepped into the circle of bare ground before us. It was Joshua. At least, it looked like him. Same build, same green jacket we'd found shredded near the earlier cairn. His face was streaked with dirt, his eyes wide with exhaustion. "You found me," he whispered. His voice cracked, desperate. "Please, help me." Hale leapt to her feet, tears streaming down her face. She called his name, but I grabbed her before she could run to him. My hand tightened until she winced. "Look at his feet," I whispered. Joshua stood still, too still. His boots didn't press into the soil. No weight, no impression. He tilted his head, his lips parting in a wide, unnatural smile. Then, without moving them, my own voice spilled out of his mouth. "Daniel, you belong here." I yanked Hale back as the figure lunged forward, its limbs jerking like a puppet. We scrambled away, sprinting into the dead forest. Behind us, the chorus of voices rose higher, shrieking, laughing, mimicking our cries. We didn't stop running until our legs buckled. When we finally collapsed, I realized the ground beneath us had changed. Moss again, damp and green. Somehow we had left the valley. The dead forest was gone, swallowed behind us. Hale curled against a tree, sobbing into her hands. I sat beside her, knife drawn, listening as the voices faded into the distance. For the first time, silence returned. Not peace, just silence. Dawn came sluggishly. We moved in a haze, pushing through thick brush. My body felt heavier with each step, my mind fogged. Hale spoke little, except to whisper Morrison's name over and over. By midday, we stumbled upon something I hadn't expected: a cabin. It sat in a small clearing, its roof sagging, its walls gray with rot. The windows were boarded from the inside. No smoke, no sound, but it was human-made, and that alone felt like salvation. We approached cautiously. The door hung ajar, creaking in the still air. Inside, the cabin was bare except for a single wooden table and chair. On the table lay another notebook. Not Joshua's, older, weather-worn. I opened it with trembling hands. The pages were filled with entries from decades past, written by different hands. Each entry told the same story: hikers vanishing, voices in the trees, figures that wore familiar faces. One passage stopped me cold. It doesn't live here. The forest is only its mouth. It pulls us through. Don't follow the voices, don't look at the cairns, and never, ever answer when it calls your name. Hale clutched my sleeve, her voice hoarse. We have to leave. Now. But as we turned, the door slammed shut behind us. Darkness seeped in through the cracks, swallowing the light, and then the voices began again, louder, closer, filling every corner of the cabin. And this time, every single one of them was mine. The cabin walls groaned as though they were breathing. The boards swelled and shifted in the dim light that bled through the cracks, and the air grew thick with the sound of my own voice speaking back at me. Not just one, but dozens, shouts, whispers, laughter, sobs, layered over one another until it became a deafening storm of familiarity. Hale pressed herself against the far wall, knife raised, her eyes wild. "Make it stop," she whispered. Her lips trembled, and I realized with horror that one of the voices belonged to her too. Not the Hale crouched before me, but a dozen versions of her, crying, begging, screaming. The door rattled violently, though nothing touched it. Dust sifted from the rafters. I wanted to smash through the boards, but the longer I listened, the weaker I felt. The voices were pulling at me, tugging inside my chest like invisible hooks. Then one rose above the rest. Clear, familiar. My father's voice. He had been dead for years, yet here he was, speaking from the shadows. "Daniel, it's all right. Come with me. You've worked enough. Let go." My legs nearly gave out. I could see him in my mind as vividly as the day I buried him, standing with that gentle half-smile. For one sickening moment, I almost believed it was him. Hale screamed, shattering the spell. She lunged at the window, ramming the boards with her shoulder. Wood cracked, splinters flying. I staggered to help, and together we smashed through, tumbling into the wet grass outside. The voices followed. They didn't fade with distance. They swelled, echoing through the forest as though the trees themselves had mouths. Shapes moved between the trunks, long-limbed, jerking, each one wearing a face I half recognized: Joshua, Cooper, Morrison, my father, me. We ran until our bodies screamed. The forest didn't resist us this time. It guided us, funneling us along a narrow corridor of trees. I realized too late that it wasn't mercy, it was leading us somewhere. We broke into another clearing as twilight bled across the sky. At its center was the largest cairn yet. Not 12 feet, but 20. A tower of stone and bone that loomed like a cathedral. Its base was ringed with ash, black and lifeless, and within that circle, the silence was absolute. No wind, no insects, no breath. Hale collapsed to her knees, clutching her ears. "I can't. Daniel, I can't." I pulled her up, but my eyes locked on the cairn. At its base was something that made my blood ice. Joshua's body. It was unmistakable. His face pale, eyes open, mouth slack. His green jacket torn, his hands outstretched as though reaching for help. For a second I thought he was dead, until his lips moved. "Help me," he whispered. His voice was raw, human fragile. I staggered forward despite myself. Every instinct screamed it was a trap, yet the sight of him clawed at the last pieces of my humanity. Hale clung to my arm, begging me not to go. But Joshua's eyes locked with mine, and I saw terror there. Real terror. I stepped into the ash circle. The world fell silent. The voices stopped. Even Hale's cries muted behind me. It was like crossing into another world. Joshua lifted his hand weakly. "Please," he mouthed. I reached him. My fingers touched his, and the skin collapsed like wet paper. His face melted, folding inward, bones shifting beneath. In seconds, Joshua's form dissolved into something pale and formless, a figure of raw mimicry. Its face became mine. "Daniel," it crooned in my voice. "You understand now." I stumbled back, horror choking me. The figure rose, towering, limbs stretching impossibly. Around it, the cairn trembled, stones shifting as if alive. The entire structure groaned like an animal stirring. Hale screamed my name from beyond the ash. I turned, desperate, but the circle trapped me. My legs refused to move. The mimic reached out, its hand long and skeletal, its face a perfect mirror of mine. "Stay," it whispered. "You've already given yourself. You belong to the woods now." I closed my eyes and thought of every search I had ever done, every life saved, every family I had delivered hope to. I thought of the rule I had always lived by: never stop moving, no matter how hopeless. Movement meant survival. With a roar, I hurled myself sideways, forcing my body to break through the circle's invisible weight. Pain tore through me like fire, but I stumbled free, collapsing into Hale's arms. She dragged me up, and together we ran, not looking back. The forest screamed. Not with voices this time, but with the sound of tearing wood and cracking stone. The ground shook beneath us. I knew the cairn had broken or awakened, or both. We didn't stop until we saw light. Real light, thin but unmistakable. The tree line opened ahead, and beyond it lay the trailhead where Joshua's car still sat, dusted with pine needles as though untouched. We staggered into the open, collapsing against the car. The forest loomed behind us, silent, still, as though nothing had happened. Hale wept openly, her hands shaking. I stared at the trees, waiting for the voices. But none came. Rangers found us hours later, guided by the emergency beacon Hale had triggered when we reached the clearing. They asked what happened, where the others were, why we looked like we hadn't slept in years. I told them the truth, that we lost the trail, that Joshua was gone, that Morrison and Cooper vanished in the woods, that Fulton collapsed and couldn't be saved. I didn't tell them about the voices, the figures, the cairns. I couldn't, because speaking it aloud would make it real again. They drove us back to the station. The forest fell behind, swallowed by fog. Hale hasn't spoken since. I lie awake every night, listening for my name whispered in the dark, because I know we didn't escape. Not really. The forest let us go, and one day it will call us back.